Hi, everyone. This is Nick Bravulis. I'm the editor of Educational Theory. This is another in a series of interviews we're doing with authors of papers that have appeared in the journal. Today's guest is Anniina Leiviska, who wrote a really outstanding paper on Habermas and the principle of decolonizing the curriculum, the university curriculum. Anniina, thank you for joining us. Can we start by talking about the larger movement of decolonizing the university, where it comes from, why it's important, and then some of your concerns about it?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here to talk about the paper. Thanks a lot. The decolonizing the university movement, it started in South Africa as a kind of a local movement called Rhodes Must Fall, which was a movement intended against certain statues that were reminiscence of the colonial legacy. But it soon extended into a more international movement that took a strong hold, especially in the States and in the UK, where the intention of the movement was to sort of redefine the terms on which university institutions operate, and especially make them more socially just and equal in terms of previously marginalized and colonized peoples and perspectives. And this concerns not only the contents of the curriculum, but also, for instance, the way knowledge is produced, what kind of criteria we use in knowledge production, who is allowed to take part in knowledge production and knowledge distribution in the universities, how different contents and subject matters are taught, and so on. So in this broader sense, decolonization goes into the very core of what it means to produce and distribute knowledge in the universities.
Outstanding. So you have a couple of concerns about some aspects of this movement, and then we'll go to the next stage, which is how you use Habermas to sort of unpack some of those concerns. But why don't you describe those two major concerns that you raise in the paper?
So one of those concerns has to do with how the decolonization movement has, it has both normative and epistemic claims, or epistemological claims to be more precise. And I think there is a problematic conflation between the two in the movement. So whereas I see it would be more beneficial even to the movement itself to merely focus or primarily focus on the advancing its normative claims, it also advances epistemological claims in a way that is sometimes problematic.
And the other concern has to do with whether there are or aren't common epistemological standards that can be
yes, of course.
That's okay.
Yes, that's the other major point that I make, that when the epistemological claims, especially when they go into the criteria of knowledge itself, that's when the problems start to arise. So there may be different forms of epistemic diversity that are beneficial to knowledge production. But then when we are discussing the criteria of knowledge production, I think there are some problems that arise with the idea of diversity.
Diversity, but also the idea of incommensurability, that these not only
yes
standards, but they're actually not even comparable or reconcilable with each other.
Yes, that is exactly.
So in terms of unpacking these two concerns and suggesting a way to reframe them or rethink them, you draw from the work of Jürgen Habermas. This paper is part of a symposium of papers that deal in different ways with Habermas. How do you find Habermas's theory useful in reframing these two issues?
Well, the first thing has to do with the distinction between normative and objective claims of validity. So Habermas makes the distinction between different validity domains, two of which are the validity claims that concern the objective world, which is broadly speaking the world of objects that is typically the object domain that natural sciences study. Whereas normative validity claims concern the social world, in more Habermasian terms, maybe the world of intersubjective agreements. And they're different kinds of criteria of validity should obtain according to Habermas than in relation to the objective world. And I use this distinction to separate between the different claims that the decolonization of the university movement has. And then I study what would they mean, what would these claims mean in relation to each of the domains.
Yeah, that's helpful. Let's spend a couple minutes on the other topic, which is whether there are or aren't common epistemological standards. How do you find Habermas useful in thinking through that issue?
Well, first of all, Habermas provides the pragmatic truth criterion, which is his attempt to, in a way, salvage one version of correspondence theory without going as far as correspondence theory goes. So the key idea there is that Habermas is not satisfied with the idea that we could conflate the concept of truth with the idea of intersubjective agreement. So he thinks that this goes against some of our deep-held realist intuitions concerning the world. So he thinks that when we operate in the world as embodied beings, we are operating with much stronger assumptions about the existence of the world and our beliefs than what could be stated in terms of intersubjective agreement. So he thinks that we sort of operate with unconditional truth claims. And this pragmatic idea he takes as a criterion of knowledge. It's not, he doesn't really give a very clear account of it himself, but maybe the best way to define it is to say that, let me think for a bit how to say it in as clearly as possible. The key idea there is that he wants the world itself to be the objective world that exists independently of human beings, to be ultimately accountable for determining whether certain beliefs are true or not. And because we cannot really, in the sense of correspondence theory, we cannot really compare our linguistic statements with the world in itself because we don't have direct access to the letter, he thinks we can nevertheless describe certain pragmatic engagements with the world or our learning processes within the world, and through them derive reasons for holding certain beliefs. That might sound a little complicated too, so maybe if I give an example, it makes it more clear. So for instance, in the context of natural sciences, experiments could be understood as these kinds of learning processes or embodiments. So they are not purely linguistic statements, but they are rather something that is embodied in the world itself. And the results of those experiments can then be formulated in the linguistic statements. And the key idea there is that the statements or theories that we formulate based on those experiments are not arbitrary in relation to the objective world, but there is a connection to those learning processes. Okay.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So how might that pragmatic criterion relate to claims in the social world, as opposed to the purely scientific world?
There, I think, based on Habermas, we should apply a different criterion, which has to do with intersubjective agreement.
Okay.
So when we are talking about different disciplines, for instance, that primarily concern the social world, the same kind of objective world that would exist independently of human beings evidently is not there as a point of reference. So there we are dealing with social structures that are changeable by human beings, and therefore there is also a different criterion. And there I kind of derive from the Habermasian ideal of moral rightness the idea of impartiality, which is basically a procedural criterion that we can have certain types of procedures, such as those in the social sciences, for instance, that have to do with the scientific practice, scientific debate, organization of scientific practices, peer review, and so on.
That's great. So I want to make it clear, this paper is not a critique of the decolonizing movement. It's sympathetic to that movement, supportive of that
Yes.
movement, but you feel that in some ways it needs certain standards or criteria that need to be defended in a way that is not transcendental or imposed from the outside. That's part of what the decolonizing critique is looking for. Is that correct?
Yes, although I'm not entirely clear what do you mean imposed by from the inside, from the outside.
Well, for example, the way you think about impartiality, you say in the paper that impartiality doesn't mean no position or a neutral position or an external position imposed from the outside. You think of impartiality in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. For instance, precisely because it's a procedural criterion, it involves certain procedural assumptions that are associated with the notion of the discourse. Then we can think of even the criteria. For instance, if we are discussing within the curriculum, what kind of, like, for instance, in the history curriculum, what kind of histories or versions of the history we should include in the history curriculum, the criteria of what then would constitute a kind of an overarching understanding of the history can be discussed within the scientific community itself. So that's what it means for Habermas, that a certain criterion is justification immanent instead of justification transcendent.
Sure, oh, that's great. So you've touched on, for example, the history curriculum. Can you give us a couple of final thoughts about the ways in which university curriculum or classrooms would be different, structured by these more Habermasian principles?
As I say in the paper, I don't think we can give a certain kind of universal solution to that question. That's something that needs to be really determined by the inclusive university communities themselves, those including those perspectives and people and voices that have been previously excluded and marginalized. But I could imagine that that kind of curriculum would involve a lot more diversity, involve a lot more of those perspectives and insights from groups that have not been included in different canons before, because the case is that I totally agree with the decolonization movement that how the rules of the university of institution have been defined from a very particular Western perspective. So in that sense, I can imagine that including people from different traditions in those discussions where those rules are discussed and defined, I could imagine that the curriculum would look very different after those discussions.
Right, outstanding. Anniina, thank you so much for talking with us today. I want to urge people, the link is here with the video, to link through and to read the whole paper. There's a lot in the paper that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, and there's other outstanding papers in this symposium that also deal in other ways with Habermas and Habermas's theory. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.